Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our final event for 2020 on clean materials. My name is Mel Clark. I'm the president and the CEO of the Cleantech Alliance, and we're delighted to be here today with our partners from the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure, having a conversation about action on clean materials in the Pacific Northwest. Thank you to all of our event sponsors that have helped make this event series possible. Without further ado, I would like to welcome to our virtual stage Reese Roth with Center for Sustainable Infrastructure, who will be introducing our event today and kicking off our first panel. Take it away, Reese.
Thanks, Mel. It's been wonderful to work with Cleantech Alliance on this, and to all of you folks, thank you everyone for joining us this morning. I'm going to do a quick flyover of the discussion series, kind of the thinking and purpose behind the discussion series, and we're going to do a quick flyover also of the first three events in this discussion series, leading up to now where we pivot toward action. Then we'll talk a little bit about some action opportunities for you to plug in on this, and then we'll have a discussion of policy action. So it's going to be a pretty exciting time. Really glad you could join us. This discussion series was really kicked off by U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. He introduced the series. I really love the way he framed this. I think this is spot on, but he says, this is exactly the kind of clean materials, whole system thinking that is not only going to help our planet, but also create millions of good paying jobs. So he's got a national perspective, millions of good paying jobs in the Pacific Northwest, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of jobs we're envisioning in this sector. This vision emerged out of a series of reports that the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure has done to sort of roadmap or blueprint out the path to world-class infrastructure in the Pacific Northwest. We want to lead the world in world-class infrastructure. So how can we help reimagine the billions and billions of dollars that we're investing every year in our infrastructure with that long-range strategic foresight and systems thinking so that we can get smarter spending and better outcomes, triple bottom line outcomes. The fourth report in this series really dove into the waste and recycling sector, and the vision that emerged from that is to build a world-class clean materials infrastructure and economy by 2040 in the Pacific Northwest that shrinks our environmental footprint, the toxic footprint dramatically of our economy, while creating tens of thousands of good jobs in our communities. One of the big ahas in doing that report for us was really that people recycle because they want to do right by the planet and do right by the community, and it's a great family oriented thing that we can do, but we're finding that, boy, if we're really going to help people do right by the planet, we've got to pay attention to more than just what happens when you toss your stuff into the recycle bin or into the garbage bin. That most of the damage to our health and to the planet happens before we throw stuff away, earlier in the life cycle of the materials that make up all the products that we buy. Over half the climate pollution from stuff that Oregonians buy is up there in the production and supply chain stage of the life cycle. Next slide. And this Oregon was one of the very first states, I think the first, to really look at the carbon footprint of imports of the stuff that we're buying every year that we're importing from other states, rather than the traditional way of looking at greenhouse gas emissions, inventorying them at the state level, which is just what are the emissions within our border from car exhaust and smokestacks. What they found was the traditional measure, just what's within our border, sector-based inventory, 63 million metric tons a year. But if you add the imported, the consumption-based inventory and take out the double counting, you almost double the climate footprint of Oregonians. So there's like almost a hidden half of our climate footprint that we're missing when we don't account for all the stuff that we're bringing in. Okay, so what's the answer? Build a vibrant, clean materials industry in this region. What the heck is clean materials? Well, it's about rethinking the entire supply chain to dramatically reduce toxic loading in humans, environmental harms through the life cycle of the materials that make up all the products in our economy. The enterprises, the public, private, nonprofit enterprises that do that, they're reimagining and redesigning products, production processes, supply chains, reuse, repair, recycling systems to prevent waste, slash the impacts on our health and environment, maximize value, and create good jobs. So that's what this is all about. Great jobs, great for jobs, great for the planet. And we've done this before. This is really modeled on what the success we've had over the last 20 years in clean energy. In 2000, the clean energy sector was, I was there. It was a tiny sector, but it got organized. It found its voice. Policymakers really responded. They loved that environment and jobs and economic development could go hand in hand. And so they enacted very proactive policies. Today, we have 130,000 jobs in clean energy in Washington and Oregon. Okay. So from the discussion series, this is now this is going to be a quick highlight of the 3 events in the discussion series so far. So we started off with 3 titans of sustainable industry innovation from the Pacific Northwest. Christy, these are leaders in clean energy industry and in the green building industry. Christine Urban, CEO of the U.S. Green Building Council for many years as it rocketed to growth. Former director of the Oregon Department of Energy. She was President Clinton's czar for renewable energy and energy efficiency. Nancy Floyd and Dave Chen, venture investors in clean energy, clean technology, sustainability. And next, can you click that? And they followed. I really encourage you to go back and listen to what they had to say. It was fascinating about how to grow this clean materials sector. They followed it with an op-ed in the Portland Business Journal, which laid out the case for the huge economic opportunity we have in clean materials. So they said, we believe that clean materials can be the new clean energy and that the Pacific Northwest will prosper by accelerating this emerging market. Powerful message. Also in that first event, 3 extraordinary clean materials entrepreneurs. Nicole Bassett, the Renewal Workshop. I went and I interviewed her in their facility where they're taking apparel that's on its way to the landfill, intercepting it, brand name apparel, and repairing and restoring it to brand new and being able to sell that. They employ about 60 people in Cascade Locks. I went into the place where it's kind of the opposite of a sweatshop. It's really beautiful, well-lit, wonderful working conditions where people are sewing and repairing this apparel that they've recovered from the landfill. Orlando Simpson, CEO of CORE. It's the only African-American owned waste management company in the country. It's a social benefit corporation. Orlando has a vision for establishing a core campus, the first clean materials industrial park with state-of-the-art incubator for cutting-edge recycling businesses that would be hosted with R&D and a variety of services to really help this clean materials sector flourish at the core campus. Fantastic entrepreneur. And Terry McDonald is just the St. Vincent de Paul in Lane County is absolutely unbelievable. I think he employs 600 people last I checked, taking hard to recycle problem wastes and recycling and upcycling them and employing people, and the revenue that they get from these enterprises go into helping homeless and other economically disadvantaged people in Lane County. So fantastic entrepreneurs. Next slide. Following that, cleaning the supply chain brought together Ayla Olvera from Intel, where she is recovering chips and microprocessor products and looking at opportunities to restore and reutilize those products and find them a new life. They sell billions of products. They're recovering millions. She's kind of their circular economy lead. Vanessa Myler-Fells at Microsoft. I'll circle back on her kind of an extraordinary story. And Lisa Brown is the director of the Department of Commerce in Washington State. So this was really a conversation about how do we move upstream, up the supply chain. And if you click you see our moderator, Marcus Barham, he wrote this article for Fortune that looked at Amazon's climate initiative. But it really is extraordinary. And if you can get through the paywall, I encourage you to look at this article. But he really shone a light on all the supply chain emissions, the upstream emissions, where for the average company in the US economy or in the global economy, their supply chain emissions are 11 times greater than their direct operational emissions. So if you take into account the full supply chain, the emissions that you've got to bring down if you're going to get to net zero are a lot greater. And so Marcus really looked at that. Next slide. And Microsoft, it's even more than 11 times. But the blue there is Microsoft and its supply chain carbon emissions, whereas the red is the operational carbon emissions. So Microsoft, what's extraordinary is Microsoft is taking responsibility for not just their direct emissions, but their supply chain emissions, which are so much greater. Next slide. And Vanessa said, this really struck me as important. Ideally, there would be a fully transparent and optimized supply chain based on cost and carbon efficiency. When I choose a supplier, I would like to be able to have visibility into the embodied carbon throughout the full value chain. Then I'll be able to account for the carbon intensity of that supply chain in my investment and procurement decisions. This is what Microsoft is moving to do, and this is groundbreaking and really important. Next slide. Okay, now I want to turn it over to Lisa Smith, who's the executive director of WSMA, and she's going to talk about this third event, Micro Businesses, Macro Opportunity.
Hey, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Reese. And I just want to say that this conference that you put on was so inspiring to us as an organization. And we were so pleased and honored to be a part of the next conversation. And I don't know if you can share that screen, but the Washington State Microenterprise Association is a nonprofit that serves other nonprofits around Washington State that just help the very smallest businesses with training, technical assistance, and microloans. And what we know is that very small businesses, many of them are on the cutting edge of innovation in clean materials and clean tech. They just don't have the oxygen or the fuel or the support to really make that happen. We're fortunate in Washington State because we have nonprofits like Simba in Spokane, or Seattle Made in Seattle, and others that are giving that high-level technical assistance to startups as well as existing businesses that are ready to move to the next stage, either to start green or get green, and so get clean. And so what we know is investment is necessary. And I don't know if you can, I'm just going to put this in the chat. If you go to our website, you can see some of the speakers that were at this workshop that we did with CSI in June, and it was really inspiring. We had folks from the Refugee Artisans Initiative. We had an entrepreneur with a disability way out in Grays Harbor who was a stump grinding company, but they got technical assistance and microloans, and then they were able to move their business to another stage. We had amazing presentation from Rochelle from Cleantech Alliance, and Mona Das, Senator Das, who's really talking about policy initiatives in the legislature toward this end. Anyway, it was so inspiring to me to see what's possible if we invest in the micro businesses at the ground level. And as they grow, that pipeline grows to the second stage companies where, you know, that next level of innovation is really necessary. So I hope that recap made sense to you. I sent a link. Thank you for the opportunity to speak this morning, and I'm super inspired.
Great, Lisa, and the lineup of the speakers that were in that event was up on the screen. So I don't know if you saw that, Lisa, but they were up there. So as you're
Awesome.
Yeah,
Wonderful. Thank you.
So that's the highlight of kind of the thinking behind the discussion series, the Clean Materials discussion series, and the highlights from the first 3 events. Now it's time to shift to action. And I believe I am kicking it over to Rochelle Ames with Cleantech Alliance. Is that right?
Correct. Hi, everybody. This is Rochelle Ames. I'm the Senior Director for Commercialization and Outreach for the Cleantech Alliance, and I am working on sharing my slides. Okay, hopefully someone can give me a thumbs up on if you can see it full screen or if I'm still in the slide presentation mode. Perfect, thanks, Reese. Great to be back at the Clean Materials series. We've really enjoyed it the entire time. I think I've learned something brand new at each session and from each presenter. So I'm really excited to now tell everyone and announce an exciting new program that the Cleantech Alliance is a part of that does touch on clean materials. So we are going to be launching a cluster program, thanks to the state of Washington, on decarbonizing the built environment. And that will be from going from building materials and how we build to be building better and cleaner, to being more efficient buildings in general, and to having grid-enabled buildings and increasing that efficiency of those buildings as they continue to operate. So first off, what is this new cluster program? If you had not heard about it, Washington State has a innovation cluster acceleration program called ICAP. So if you hear that acronym, that's what we're talking about. It's funded through funding through the U.S. Economic Development Administration, and there were 6 clusters that have been funded through this program currently. They're expecting more funding to come through, so you may see additional clusters being formed. And really they're around large, hairy challenges that we know will take deep collaboration and deep integration into existing systems. And that interesting, I think one of our board members said, someone said like co-opetition, where you have industry both working together and still having that competition to advance these challenges. So why is the Cleantech Alliance doing this? We have in some ways been doing this cluster development for many, many years. That's it. And inherently, the Cleantech Alliance is about this collaboration and bringing diverse voices together to advance industry. We've been mostly focused on clean technology in general and propping up all of the different types and subsectors of clean technology. And what we'll be doing is using that backbone and these activities that the Cleantech Alliance does already to launch this new cluster that will be focused on, again, decarbonizing the built environment and looking at buildings specifically. So what makes up a cluster? Why is a cluster interesting? Why is who participates in a cluster? Entrepreneurs, we have those startups, those early stage companies, the innovators. We have those that are funding modules, from private capital to government funding. We have those large corporate entities that are doing work on their own, that need to collaborate together and that also want that innovation coming in. We have governments involved and parts on those policy sides. And then we of course have those in research and education and workforce. So this is a kind of a look at what our current makeup of some of the Cleantech Alliance members that are working in the built environment will be, again, using that backbone of this collaboration to launch our cluster. So again, we're working on decarbonizing the built environment. How and what are we going to do? We are going to accelerate competitive and affordable innovations built here in Washington that can be exported to the nation and world. We're also going to be one of the biggest points of emphasis that we want to make within everything that we do in this cluster is striving to ensure that there's diversity in the workforce and that those that are most vulnerable to climate impacts and that have been most historically excluded from the systems that have then also created these impacts, that everything that we do within this cluster will be layered on with making sure that activities are helping those most vulnerable folks. And then the other part is, and I have to move you all because I can see my full slide, working on policies and initiatives that will help incentivize that decarbonization technologies. And then just a little bit more focus area on what exactly we're going to be doing. We're currently building our advisory board, which will determine a lot of the very concrete working groups that will be formed, but inherently, overall, this is a mapping of what we'll be working on. We'll be doing research, development, employment access and resources. We will be working on talent development, workforce, and again, especially making sure that we are working with those communities that have been most impacted by climate change. We are going to be bringing together the industry and the research and the government entities that are working on these clusters so that we are attracting the best talent and best other folks from around the world to our cluster. And then we're also going to be promoting the cluster. We know that inherently we have a lot of those resources and kind of prowess in the built environment already here, but we need to be talking about it more and promoting it. And then again, layered on with all of those activities and flowing through everything will be this focus on justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and making sure that everything that we do is centered on serving those most vulnerable communities and those that have been most historically excluded from the processes. So really quick information, we are just launching this now. There should be some more press releases from the state on the clusters and additional clusters that are out there. We hope that you are interested in collaborating. So please feel free to reach out to us. These are the staff contacts for the program. Mel will be in our breakout room later today, but please feel free to reach out to any of us for any questions and if you're interested in collaborating and learning more. And with that, I'm going to pass it back to Lisa to announce an exciting program that they are launching.
Yes, so thank you so much. And I want to just share with you that we know that there are incredible specialists all over the state working with very small businesses and those with under 5 or even under 20 employees. But what we know is that there are like incredible platforms that organizations are using. There's technical experts. There are public agencies like Department of Commerce or Department of Ecology, King County, and there's wisdom already in place. The challenge is that they're all over the place. Not all of them are able to talk with each other. And so our vision is to work with partners in this room to convene a community of practice at the beginning of the year. And what we'll be able to do is identify who's doing what's working well, what gaps exist, who's in the room, who's not in the room, and really build our capacity as a state, more importantly, as organizations serving these small businesses, to really break down the fibrous and rigid structures that are there that are keeping very small businesses from moving along this path. And so, just in the spring, WSMA was able to fund $1.6 million to nonprofits around the state to support small businesses. And we were fortunate to be able to fund organizations like Zero Waste and others, Simba in Seattle, in Spokane. And so if we can come together and learn from each other, I think our capacity to really create system change in clean materials in the future. So I hope that was helpful. Let me know if you have any questions.
Super, Lisa, thank you, terrific. And you can already see between the cluster initiative that Rochelle described that CTA is launching and this community of practice around small business in the clean material space that Lisa's launching, that there are ways for you to plug in. It just seems like an incredibly exciting opportunity to be at the ground floor where 20 years ago, clean energy as an industry sector was tiny and nascent, but full of promise and hope that you could deliver tens of thousands of jobs and do something incredibly important for the environment and for the future. And we're at that same place today with clean materials. And so these are some opportunities for you to plug in. A third opportunity is that the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure is really excited about a project that we'd like to launch, and we've got this project prospectus that there's this Q code, whatever that's called, and a link there where you can find out more. But basically, it's a concentrated effort to sit down and talk to all of you, all of the key thought leaders and innovators in the clean materials industry space about what are the action priorities. What are the most important policies? What are the most important projects? What are the most important investments? What are the most important things that we need to do in the 6-month time horizon, 12 months, 24 months to hit the accelerator on the clean materials industry in the Pacific Northwest and set us on a trajectory where we're going to really become world-class innovators and kind of the greatest hub in the world for clean materials innovation. So I encourage you, we need to find sponsors over the next 2 months. So if your company or organization wants to be a part of this, wants to help make it happen, please talk to us about this. And we hope to launch in February or so, and a concentrated 6-month effort to come out the other end with kind of a shared vision and a shared action plan strategy. Okay. So now we're shifting gears, and I want to introduce, well, in a second, we're going to hear from one of Oregon's most important leaders. I think one of the most important leaders in the country on sustainable materials, clean materials policy. But before, I'll let her introduce him. But first, I want to introduce one of Washington's leaders, Stewart. And Kara's, since 2019, she's been the coordinator for Washington's Recycling Development Center. And she's been at Ecology for 15 years. And she's been providing important leadership on recycling and converting waste to resources and protection from toxic pollution. So we're really grateful to Kara for her leadership over these 15 years and what she's doing to stand up the Recycling Development Center into an impactful organization for the state. And we're grateful to Ecology for sponsoring the Clean Materials Report and for sponsoring this discussion series. So Kara, take it away.
Oh, there you go. Reese had a little hiccup. Hey, this is Kara Stewart, Washington State Department of Ecology. Reese just stole a little bit of my intro. I'll just go ahead and not say any more about myself or our sponsorship. I just honestly would like to say what I really appreciate about this group and what you've done is bringing all of these wonderful people together. What I'm really missing, because we're all remote, is the opportunity to connect with Lisa Smith over a cup of coffee, or to track down Rachel Ames and talk to her about her projects at Cleantech Alliance. So looking forward to ongoing partnerships and conversations as this goes forward. So thanks to everybody for being here, all the smart work. It's always an honor to be grouped with such a great group of folks. First off, we are going to get a quick update from Eric Chambers, who's the External Relations Director at the Oregon Beverage Recycling Corporation. And then we'll bump to Dave Alloway after that. But Eric, go ahead and give us your update.
You bet. Thank you. I'm going to attempt to share my screen here. I have just a couple slides that I would love to show you. You can get that up. And all right, can everybody see that? Excellent. So my name's Eric Chambers. I'm the External Relations Director at the Oregon Beverage Recycling Cooperative. And I am super grateful for the invitation to be here today to talk a little bit about our deposit return system and how it works in Oregon. I imagine that a number of people on this call are familiar with Oregon's beverage container return law. It was the first in the state and has been an inspiration for many other states in the nation to adopt similar policies, but remains one of the most successful policies in terms of outcomes. The bottle bill is actually, Oregon's bottle bill is celebrating its 50th birthday this year, and arguably was one of the very first EPR systems in the nation, although I'm not sure in 1971 that people were aware of extended producer responsibility or exactly how that would work. The law itself was not prescriptive. It just said that for qualifying containers if consumers brought them back to the point that they bought them, it had a redemption value. And then it told the beverage industry to figure out how to work the back end of that. And so over time, that has resulted in a statewide cooperative that operates as the beverage industry's steward of this amazing recycling program that helps achieve some really outstanding outcomes. We have now 500 employees who are part of that vertically integrated program, from CDL truck drivers to materials processors who are actively working in the recycling community, to our redemption center staff and our administrative staff. So a pretty robust program on the back end to provide that stewardship approach. When Oregon's bottle bill was initially approved in 1971, as I mentioned, it was all about the point of sale. It was about bringing those containers back to retailers. But what's happened over time is really interesting. As we've innovated the program, we've actually seen growth in the bottle drop network, which is a range of redemption options, and a decrease in the kind of direct return to retail piece. So the blue line on this graph is containers the pathing of which are coming through retailers. The purple line is convenience stores like 7-Eleven. And then the salmon colored line on top is the bottle drop network. And you can see that in 2010, the bottle drop network wasn't really doing any direct container returns. And now the bottle drop network, which is operated by OBRC, is doing the majority of returns, and much of that is through our bagged bulk program, which is a real innovation that we've seen in Oregon and is very popular amongst consumers. This is kind of an example of what that looks like, but consumers can put aluminum, glass, and plastic, all three commodities, into 20-gallon bags, put a sticker on it that associates it with their account, and they can drop it at any of 82 locations, and growing across the state of Oregon. We're building these out right now really rapidly at the rate of 1 or 2 a month even. And the growth has been really tremendous. We had 5.2 million bags returned in 2019, 8.3 million bags in 2020, and through October of this year have already had 9.6 million bags come back in through the system, and we're on pace for over 11 million. So it's been a real interesting element, and it has involved the consumer in a really direct way in this EPR system. We also have a blue bag program that involves over 4,000 nonprofits who raise money through bottles and cans. And collectively, they're on pace this year for well over $5 million of funds to do amazing work in communities across the state, which is one of the really neat things about Oregon's system. You could be motivated by the original intent of the law, which is litter remediation. You can be motivated by some really outstanding recycling outcomes. You can be motivated by the financial incentive that is represented by the redemption value. You can be motivated to support a nonprofit that's doing amazing work in your community. Or you could be motivated to save money for college. We have a great partnership with the Oregon Treasurer's Office in the state's 529 college savings plan, where you can directly link your bottle drop account and your college savings plan account. So lots of different incentives to involve Oregonians in recycling, and it's been very popular. From an outcome perspective, Oregon's system remains one of the most effective in the world. We have an 80 to 90% redemption rate, which is, again, amongst the very highest. We have all of our materials go back to the highest and best possible outcomes. Our plastic, 100% of our plastic goes to the ORPET facility in St. Helens. It remains sequestered from other contaminants in the stream, and so all of it goes back and becomes grade A, food grade rPET, and helps our members achieve their recycled content goals. 100% of our glass is processed right here in Portland and becomes glass bottles again, and all of our aluminum is processed domestically and becomes grade A sheet aluminum, which can be, again, right in that closed loop of a can to a can. So we're very proud of our recycling outcomes. And then, again, I mentioned some of the upsides of this sort of industry model, but there's no cost to taxpayers. It involves consumers in a very direct way in EPR. The familiarity with Oregon's bottle bill is quite high, and it remains very popular. There's no handling fees. And industry went from, very vehemently opposing the bottle bill in 1971 to really growing and understanding how this connects with their stewardship goals at this point, and also helps them with their recycled content goals and mandates. So it's become a system that industry can really embrace, and they again can get some really outstanding outcomes. One of the cool things about Oregon's bottle bill is that almost everybody is involved in it. At Bottle Drop alone, we have about 800,000 account holders, which by some estimates could represent 1 in 3 Oregon households with a Bottle Drop account. But even beyond that, through either return to retail or reverse vending machines at redemption centers, nearly every Oregonian touches the system. We did polling with DHM Research, and 95% of Oregonians are familiar with our system, and 97% of them continue to feel like it's a pretty good idea. So it's well known, it's ubiquitous across our population, and it's very popular in terms of what outcomes it represents. I'll be very brief, I'll wrap up, but I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. Oregon's model is, proves that we can get 2 billion containers back every year at a very, very high rate of redemption, and that we can involve Oregonians in the way that system works and what it represents and why it's important. So we've watched the Washington EPR discussions with a lot of intrigue. We're excited about the progress that you've made. And in Oregon, we've seen where our bottle bill deposit return system can be EPR and can complement other extended producer responsibility efforts that were just approved in Oregon's bill. So we're super proud of the work that we do, and proud to be able to talk about that work with other states and efforts across the world. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Eric. It's always wonderful to see the work that's happening in Oregon. As a Washingtonian, I love Oregon as well. Some of my favorite cousins live in the Beaverton area. So looking forward to more conversations about bottle deposits. But before we toss it over to David Alloway and his discussion of the new things that are happening in Oregon, just want to remind everybody in the audience that we'll have a little bit of a Q&A after David's presentation. So if you have questions, pop them in the chat as he's moving along, and we'll share them with David when he wraps up. I've been happy to work with David a little bit off and on over the past few years, and he's always been a wonderful person, one of the smartest folks I think I know. He's here to share with you what's coming in Oregon State. So take it away, David. Unmute, David.
There we go. Thank you. We have someone had to do that.
Okay, almost the smartest person I know.
Someone had to do that. No, I'm just okay. So you can see my slides, okay?
Yes, we can.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much. So the legislation that I'm going to summarize here is Senate Bill 582, the Oregon Plastic Pollution and Recycling Modernization Act, which was signed into law this summer. It is primarily a comprehensive, sweeping reform of Oregon's recycling system, one that will completely modernize and increase investments in our system by around $800 million a decade. But it also goes upstream to reduce the use of certain materials and incentivizes cleaner production and technology. How did this happen? Oregon, like the rest of the West Coast, had become unusually reliant on export markets for many of our collected recyclables. And unfortunately, the materials we were exporting were increasingly dirty, or as we say, contaminated. They were so contaminated that China closed its doors in late 2017, and that put our recycling system into a tailspin. Collection programs dropped materials, raised rates on users, or both. A closer look at the system uncovered deeper and more systemic problems, which I'll detail in a moment. My office convened a steering committee to make recommendations for a longer-term modernization of the system. The committee's charge was to recommend a system that would meet 3 overarching objectives: optimize environmental benefits, be resilient to changes in supply and demand, and restore public trust. And in September of last year, after close to 100 meetings and extensive research and deliberation, the committee found a consensus recommendation to improve and stabilize Oregon's recycling system. That consensus informed a legislative concept, which was further negotiated until it was ultimately passed by our legislature in June and signed into law by Governor Kate Brown on August 6th. The bill goes into effect on January 1st of next year. Now, even as the steering committee was exploring its options, the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure was also taking a hard look at the much larger issue of materials and their impacts across their entire life cycle. And it published this report here, which included the idea of 4 diamond solutions: preventing waste, extending product life, developing clean production and processing hubs, and optimizing recycling. And I'm pleased to say that the Oregon Act is closely aligned with the center's recommendations, and I'll come back to this at the end after we take a closer look at the Act itself. So I mentioned several challenges in today's recycling system, and here's a summary of several of them. Industry's willingness to use recycled feedstocks is imperiled by growing contamination, which ultimately stems from public confusion. And our Act will reduce that as the new law provides more and better public education and feedback and creates a consistent statewide recycling collection list. To improve inequities throughout the recycling system, the Act requires services to better meet the needs of unserved and underserved communities and creates safeguards to prevent against irresponsible exports that harm people and the environment and create justified reputational harm to recycling. To address the generally unfavorable economics of recycling, the law requires producers to share in responsibility with local governments and ratepayers, and thus internalize a portion of costs. And to address a trend of creating more garbage and recycling less over time, the Act will increase the quantity and quality of recycling as it becomes easier and more accessible across the state. It also creates incentives to use fewer materials and significant funding to reuse materials and prevent waste at the source. And while we currently have no guarantee of responsible recycling, the new law requires producers and recycling processors to ensure that material collected for recycling is actually recycled and in ways that protect the environment and human health. So here's how the Act achieves these solutions and more. Producers of covered products, which include packaging, printed paper, and food serviceware, will join and make payments to a producer responsibility organization, or PRO. The Act allows for one or multiple PROs, which are nonprofit membership organizations serving their member producers. The PROs will fund necessary upgrades and perform other functions that will make Oregon's recycling programs more convenient, accessible, and responsible. The Act applies to both residentially and commercially generated materials. Producer payments will be scaled based on what materials they use, how much they sell into Oregon, and the environmental impacts of those materials. Producer support will make it possible to create a uniform statewide recycling collection list that will make collection consistent across the state. Local governments will maintain their current role overseeing and providing collection in their communities and take on new responsibilities to expand collection service and carry out programs to reduce contamination at the source. Once collected, materials will be processed at facilities that meet new performance standards before being sold to end markets that can handle the materials responsibly. These processing facilities are really central to making the commingled recycling system work. The facilities are currently unpermitted, and under the new law, the state will permit or certify processing facilities that sort recyclables, requiring them to meet new performance standards for sorting quality, managing contamination, and reporting on final destinations. A separate standard will require the facilities to pay their workers a living wage and provide supportive benefits. The PROs will pay processing facilities fees to offset the costs of removing contamination and meeting other performance standards and to absorb the volatility of recycling commodity markets. All of this will be overseen by DEQ, which will hold producers and other parties accountable where necessary, and a new advisory council made up of a range of system participants will review important elements and advise DEQ and the PROs. Now, these new system requirements are going to increase the transactional costs of the system, but our analysis suggests that the overall costs to society may actually be lower once human health and environmental impacts are factored in. They probably will be lower because better recycling reduces the very real economic cost of human health and climate change impacts that result from pollution from raw material extraction and manufacturing. We quantified those benefits and monetized them and believe that the benefits will likely exceed the higher transactional costs, such as trucks, equipment, and labor. But this speaks to one of the core challenges of recycling, which is that the economic benefits of reducing pollution are real, but are typically not on the balance sheet of anyone in the recycling industry. It is a classic example of what economists call externalities or market failure, And this act aims to correct it by internalizing these costs and benefits into the calculus of producer transactions. At present, the collection and processing of recyclables through collection programs overseen by local governments in Oregon costs around $220 million a year, and utility ratepayers pay about 85% of that cost, with end markets filling the balance. This act will bring in a third funding source, producers. In an average year, they will contribute about 28% of transactional costs, covering most of the cost of modernization that I've just described, or about $80 million annually. Importantly, producers will also absorb the volatility in recycling commodity markets, taking that out of the utility rates. And that's important because that volatility is what caused many local governments in this state to scale back on recycling service. So in years of strong commodity prices, producers will pay less. And in years of weak commodity prices, producers will pay more. The act has a few other features I'd like to mention. Separate from that uniform statewide collection list, the state can also name some additional materials for which the PROs are required to set up or enhance recycling services. The purpose here is to capture those items that make sense to recycle but don't belong in the commingled mix. For example, film plastics, which are recyclable but wreak havoc if commingled with other materials. The bill also contains progressively increasing and enforceable recycling goals specific to plastic packaging. And the PROs will also work with other system participants to ensure that all materials collected for recycling will be recycled at responsible end markets. And this helps to assure the people of Oregon that the materials we separate will actually get recycled and in environmentally responsible ways. The law addresses some other important elements, including the life cycle impacts of packaging and paper. There are a number of legislative reports addressing topics such as equity in the recycling system, litter and marine debris, and the many challenges of compostable packaging and truth in labeling. And because recycling by itself is so insufficient, the Act has several precedent-setting features involving material selection, design, and use. It prioritizes reducing the life cycle impacts of packaging. It requires PROs to set their membership fees in a way that incentivizes impact assessment, disclosure, and more sustainable material selection and design. It also requires the 25 largest producers to conduct life cycle assessments of some of their products and to share that information publicly. And lastly, producers will also fund programs that reduce the environmental impacts of covered products through means other than recycling, such as waste prevention or reuse, which are justifiably higher priorities. Once implemented, this will be the largest fund for prevention and reuse projects on a per capita basis in the history of this country. So I want to talk for a moment about social equity, because throughout this presentation, I've mentioned the various ways in which the law advances social equity in the recycling system, and I'll summarize them here all in one place. In the process of developing the bill, the Oregon Steering Committee identified by consensus 16 features that it desired of a future recycling system, and including that the future system would be designed to advance equity. DEQ used this benchmark to build into the process different equity considerations, including an examination of how our current system fails to distribute benefits and burdens equitably, and outreach to underrepresented stakeholders to inform the process and proposal. In the new law, there are many features that are designed to begin improving the social impacts both in Oregon and beyond. The law makes collection more accessible by equalizing costs between urban and rural parts of the state and expanding collection access for underserved communities, both rural and multifamily. It will make public information more accessible by requiring producers and local governments to provide educational materials in multiple languages. It will protect recycling facility workers by reducing inbound contamination, such as diapers and sharps, also providing them with living wages and supportive benefits. It will require responsible exports by placing requirements on outbound bale quality and prohibiting recyclables or contamination from being sent to unverified end markets here or abroad. It will elevate the voices of historically underserved groups with 2 dedicated seats on the new statewide advisory council. And finally, it establishes a continuous improvement model by requiring a statewide equity assessment and legislative report with recommendations once every 4 years. So how does the Act align with CSI's Diamond Solutions for Clean Materials? Well, first, to prevent waste at the source and extend the life of materials, the Act includes significant funding for waste prevention and reuse projects, such as installing dishwashers in school cafeterias and water bottle filling stations to reduce the use of single-use packaging. Cost internalization via fees that producers pay to their PRO will also increase their cost of material use, and that should lead to some packaging design to use fewer materials. Now, the products targeted by this bill are largely high turnover items, not durable goods. So there's not as much opportunity to extend material life in this act, and this points out a very important issue. When we talk about materials, most people gravitate towards thinking about waste and packaging. But waste and the environmental impacts of waste are typically only a small fraction of the environmental impacts of materials. Impacts of resource extraction and production are typically many times larger. And while packaging gets most of the attention, when you quantify impacts, other materials, including food, building materials, and durable goods, have equally large, if not larger, impacts. So even as this act focuses on the management of packaging waste, one reason we're happy with it is that it should fix those problems and free up resources and bandwidth to pivot to what are frankly much larger and more important challenges, reducing upstream impacts and addressing other materials. The Act also establishes some important precedents that go upstream, as I mentioned. To advance clean production and processing, the Act requires that materials collected must flow to environmentally responsible end markets. And through fee incentives, there are also incentives for cleaner production and the evaluation and disclosure of environmental impacts. The Act requires the state to set consistent accounting rules for such disclosure, which will level the playing field and close some accounting loopholes. And it sets another important precedent in beginning to require the disclosure of impacts. Separately, the permit requirements of commingled processing facilities will create a high but level and fair bar that will improve the effectiveness and performance of that critical sector of our infrastructure. And finally, the Act is all about optimizing recycling, and it includes statutory criteria and processes to do just that. It will increase access and availability to collection services, but more importantly, it will clean up the recycling system so that it can be both sustained and sustainable and serve its function in perpetuity of providing a steady, clean, reliable flow of materials to industrial end users. Because optimizing and maximizing recycling are not the same. And even as some would call for zero waste, Oregon is committed to looking at impacts beyond the landfill and advancing recycling only where it makes environmental sense to do so, as opposed to trying to recycle everything. Requiring everything to be recyclable and recycled, or compostable and composted, is ripe with unintended consequences for human health and the climate, and that's a direction that this Act does not go. Recycling is helpful, even a necessary condition of sustainability, but recycling is also entirely inadequate, and we need to acknowledge the limitations of recycling even as we work to optimize it. And we need to activate additional solutions such as low toxic and low carbon production. Oregon's Act largely solves the challenges with recycling and establishes several on-ramps to advance some of the deeper and more essential policy work, but more needs to be done. So the Act itself will not get us to a sustainable future, but it makes several large and very important steps in that direction. So finally, Reese asked me to reflect for a moment on how the Act will help to grow a vibrant, clean materials sector and good jobs here in the Pacific Northwest. And given all the limitations I just mentioned, the Act by itself will not by itself grow that clean material sector in all of the ways it could and should grow, but it will make some significant improvements. At the heart of recycling are the industries that use recycled materials to make new products, such as the Norpak paper mill in Longview, pictured here. Norpak is a major user of waste paper from both Oregon and Washington, and it is struggling with millions of dollars in annual expenses associated with removing the contamination that comes into their mill mixed with feedstocks. Indeed, Norpak has put the two states on notice that if we don't clean up the recycling system, they may be forced to drop recycling and switch back to virgin pulp production. And that would be regrettable from both an environmental perspective, but also a jobs perspective, because multiple studies have shown that the act of recycling and production of recycled materials has greater job creation potential than the acts of disposal and virgin materials production. So by cleaning up our recycling system, we'll help to support established major employers in this region, such as Norpak, Cascade Steel, Owens, Illinois, and Georgia Pacific. By increasing the quantity of materials collected for recycling and requiring that materials be transferred only to responsible end markets, the Act creates new potential for domestic entrepreneurs, such as plastic reprocessors, or new end markets, such as Denton Plastics and Orpet. We saw something similar play out in British Columbia after that province adopted EPR for packaging, with more than $18 million invested in a plastic reprocessing facility there. The Act will also make employment much better for the hundreds of people, many of them people of color, who have some of the most difficult jobs in our state, working the sort lines at the commingled processing facilities. They have daily exposure to all of the garbage that people are tossing into their recycling bin. They sort by hand garden hoses and lawn furniture, but diapers and syringes as well. Our Act puts a number of measures in place to reduce that contamination upstream at the source. And it also requires the processing facilities to pay their workers a living wage and supportive benefits. That's a very important feature. Another part of this industrial ecosystem are all the companies that make the equipment that is used in the commingling processing facilities. And those facilities will require significant upgrades. Companies like Bulk Handling Systems in Eugene and others that design and install advanced robotics, optical sorters, and other advanced technologies that will be required to achieve the new sorting and quality outputs that the Act requires. And even as some of this automation will reduce some of the manual labor on the sort lines, it will replace a portion of it with equipment operators and maintenance technicians, the creation of higher paying, higher skilled jobs. Then there's that waste prevention and reuse fund that I mentioned, which we estimate will result in investments of around $8 million annually. Reuse in particular can be highly labor intensive, and that's one reason it's fallen out of favor in the last few decades. And this bill changes the calculus to make reuse more feasible. Evaluating the environmental impacts of materials, as this law both incents and requires, will create new opportunities in the field of life cycle and impact assessment. And finally, I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that the producer responsibility organizations will be hiring employees, and so will DEQ. In fact, we'll have 5 or 6 job openings next week that will be involved in standing up and maintaining this new program. If you're interested, please check out the website here, where you can also sign up for periodic updates via a link on this website. And we're very excited about this Act and its potential. So I'll stop here, and thanks very much.
Thanks, David. For those of you who have not seen David present before, it's always an extremely informative and well-researched presentation. I do go to your website at ODEQ's about this bill. They have some great summary information about the contents and the timeline. So anybody that's interested in some of those details could go there. Great work at Oregon. We have about 5 minutes or so for questions. I want to go to the folks that are in the chat asking for a little bit more information, and then we'll go to Heather Trim to give an update on legislation in Washington State. So there's a quick question from Tony Usabelli about, can you talk a bit about how you were able to build political agreement to get the bill passed, and what were the challenges? You guys put a lot of time into that.
It was largely the Recycling Steering Committee. It operated under rules of consensus. It had a lot of different players at the table. It took about 100 meetings to get to that consensus, but basically there was consensus between the state, the local governments, the waste collectors, the waste processors, and some end markets. Who we didn't have at the table were the producers. There were some reasons for that, but we went into the legislative session with a strong alliance of support. And then the producers pushed back. There were some producers who supported the bill. There were some who opposed. There were some negotiations that occurred, some compromises that were made. It's the political process. But doing all that homework and turning over so many rocks and evaluating so many options before going into the legislative process was a key ingredient to our success.
Yeah, and those were well attended. I know I watched several of them. I was always proud of the work that you guys were doing, again, down in Oregon.
Thank you.
I'm going to go to one quick question I have a couple of folks from ecology on the call, and I don't want to really give them too much airtime, but can you talk about responsible end markets? How are you ensuring the transparency?
Right, so the commingled processors, as part of their new permit requirements, will be required to disclose the final destinations of the materials they export. And if they export, I'm sorry, it's not just about exports, it's domestic or export. The bill is agnostic in terms of destination. The producer responsibility organizations, which collect some materials, have a similar requirement. And then they are also required to police the processors. Finally, DEQ polices both. So we have the processors reporting, we have the PROs reporting, we have DEQ overseeing both of those. And failure to report or failure to use a responsible end market is either a permit violation if you're a processor, or it's a violation of the terms of the act. It's an enforceable violation on the PRO. So there will be some back and forth, I'm sure. It's a new model that we'll be implementing, but there is precedent for it. Some of the Canadian provinces and European nations do something similar when it comes to in-market responsibility.
That's great. I'm going to skip another ecology question and go to Jeff. What percentage of collected materials are not usable for recycling? What goes to the landfill or post-process?
Well, right. At present in Oregon, depending on the community and the sector you're collecting from, somewhere between 5 and 20% of the material in the recycling carts are materials that don't belong there. Now, by don't belong there, that doesn't mean they can't be recycled. It means our current processing facilities are not set up to effectively sort and process them. Some of those materials could be recycled with improvements in processing. Some of them cannot be. So at present, somewhere between 5 and 20%, depending on the community and source, of what's collected is being disposed of. And we expect that number to go down significantly, both as we expand recycling opportunities to accept more materials into the system, and also as we reduce contamination at the source.
Okay, great. I do have a couple more questions in the chat, but they come from my ecology partners, and I know we do often have a direct line to David, so I'll save those questions for later. I wanted to give Heather Trim a chance to join us and share some updates. And David, I've lost the gentleman who asked a question about what's David Della, what's going on in Washington State. I think Heather will give you an answer to that question. So Heather's Executive Director of Zero Waste Washington, and one of the most important partners we have in Washington State working in this arena. So take it away, Heather.
Can you see my slide?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kara. We work closely with ecology and a bunch of stakeholders in Washington State and with David across the lines. I am, let's see if this is going to advance. Great. So just a quick introduction to Zero Waste Washington. For those of you who don't know, we're a statewide nonprofit. We're working towards making trash obsolete. And we do that primarily by working on trying to help get laws passed at the city, the county, the state, and a little bit at the federal level now. We do research projects and pilot projects. So just starting out with a slide about that is from the ecology's brand new waste characterization report, just published about a month ago, and this is for 2020. This is the material that is going to disposal, that is landfill or incineration, a little bit of incineration in Washington, and it's by percentage. So you can see that organics is the largest percentage by weight, and then you have paper and plastic. A lot of that is packaging that is still going to the landfill. And granted, we don't necessarily want to get down to 0-0, but we are definitely, I think David would agree that we do want to get this number to be a lot better than it's looking here. So this is kind of where we're headed. And in Washington State, our recycling rate, which has been perhaps admired by other states, is still not where we need it to be. So in 1989, our recycling rate, we had a goal of 50%. We were gradually going up and up and up, and then we've had various setbacks, including China National Sword and other changes, and we are now on a downward trajectory in Washington State generally, and so this is what we are also concerned about. There have been a number of bills at the statewide level in Washington to help address basically reducing plastic pollution, revamping our recycling system, et cetera. This bill was championed by Senator Mona Das and Liz Berry, and it passed, was signed by the governor in May, 5022, SB 5022. If you start in the lower left-hand corner, get my right and left correct here, it banned expanded polystyrene, AKA also commonly known as styrofoam, food service packaging, coolers, and packing peanuts, different dates coming up in the future. Coming up, number 2, in January 2022, food establishments will only be able to provide single-use utensils, straws, condiment packs, and cold beverage lids upon customer affirmation. And so that would be like your restaurants, but also your third-party delivery services like Grubhub. Number 3, we removed the requirement that you must have the chasing arrow symbol on plastic packaging, plastic products, because it's confusing. We didn't say what replaces it. We just removed the requirement that it must be there. And then at the bottom, number 4, the law requires minimum recycled content over a series of dates culminating in 2031, for example, for beverage containers, personal care products, cleaning products, and trash bags. Okay, looking ahead to 2022, there are 4 zero waste related bills that are related to today's topics that are being developed. One is packaging extended producer responsibility. I'll talk about that in a minute. Organics and methane, I'll talk about that in a minute. I will not talk about, but right to repair is a bill that's been introduced and debated for quite a few years, and it is now coming back. And then batteries, extended producer responsibility, was introduced and went through, or was in a committee in 2 years ago with Rep. Mead. The new champion for that is Representative Harris Talley. And right to repair, by the way, is being championed by Representative Mia Gregerson. Okay, so turning to the first bill, which has to do with recycling and reducing waste. So there are basically 4 key areas of intervention. This is taking David's kind of concept and just looking at it from a slightly different angle, which is, where are the 4 areas that we can intervene in our recycling system? One is in sort of our circular economy for packaging and printed products. One is how the product is designed in the first place. 2 is the public's education, how well they understand what to put where, and the confusion they have right now. 3 is infrastructure investments. What do we need to upgrade our facilities? And then lastly, how do we develop end markets so that we can displace virgin material? So the first 3 are supply, and the last one is demand. And the bill that we passed, that Senator Das passed last year, helped address demand by helping increase end markets. And an extended producer responsibility bill, and the bill that is being worked on right now, the Renew Act, is addressing the first 3 of this, the supply piece. How do we get clean, safe materials that are flowing in a true circular economy? And that an extended producer responsibility program helps also coordinate the full system. These programs have been in place across the world for decades. So this is color-coded to show where different stages are for extended producer responsibility for packaging and paper is already either in place or being developed. And you'll note that all different colors, but gray means nothing yet. And we'll see that the US is one of the ones that's gray. Maine and Oregon did pass bills this summer. That's what David just talked about, the Oregon one. So the proposed Renew Act, which is being championed by Senator Mona Das, includes a producer responsibility component, which is full, that is to fully fund and coordinate universal residential recycling collection across the state, a harmonized list so that people are not confused, it's the same thing across the state of what can be recycled, reaching particular targets, and outreach and education and improving the system, building on our existing regulatory framework that we have for solid waste management in Washington state. So the counties and cities, for example, retain their authority, and the contracts will maybe have to be updated, but they will be maintained. It has mandated targets. It has clear and consistent labeling for recyclability, also known as truth in labeling. And then also this summer, there's been a huge amount of effort to, again, work on that end market, the demand piece, to look at more products to add to what 5022 did. So this would be polypropylene tubs, PET thermoforms, and single-use cups to add recycled, mandated recycled post-consumer content for those. So specifically, two things that are a little different than the Oregon bill law that just passed is that there will be a target, or right now there's proposed to be a target, that the materials that consumers get right now must all be recyclable, compostable, or reusable no later than January 1, 2030. This matches the California voter initiative. It's going to go before the voters in November 2022 for plastic packaging, and then also has specific targets for recycling, and that's the bottom chart here, including in there a 10% target for reuse. Now I'm going to shift quickly, and I just have a few more slides to talk about the methane organics bill. The imperative for this is that methane is critically important for us to address to help bend the curve on climate change. It is way more potent than CO2, but it lives for a much shorter number of years. And so if we can really address it now, we can actually make a big difference bending the curve, although CO2 must be addressed in the long run. So in terms of municipal solid waste landfills, they are deemed by EPA to be the third largest man-made source of methane. And addressing this, we have a big report that Ecology is going to be putting out on the street, I think in about a couple of weeks, which is to look at food waste, and it has 30 policy recommendations in it, helping reduce food waste. And that includes diversion to food rescue groups, and particularly getting that material out of the landfills. Then we, Zero Waste Washington, did a report that we published earlier this year. It's on our website if you look under publications. And we interviewed a bunch of people and did an assessment of how organic material is being managed in Washington and what can we do to address it. There are landfill bans in other states, and this is one of the major policy initiatives, is to get the organic material to not be flowing to the landfill, but to be flowing to compost, anaerobic digestion, and other mechanisms. So you can see a lot of states are listed on this slide, and you will not see the word Washington. We do not have that, although, for example, Seattle does. I'm almost done, Karen. So we're building this on, this bill is being built on California's 1383 that was passed 5 years ago, that has a reduction target of 75% of organic material going to the landfills by 2025. We have a massive stakeholder process going on. If you're interested, email me and you can join that stakeholder process for this bill. And that is it. I can see I'm getting the
Thanks, Heather. I wasn't going to give you the big hook, but I was going to nudge. And I think that wraps it up for our session. And I believe I transfer it back to Mel Clark to do the breakouts.
All right, thank you, everybody. We are now going to move into some breakout room discussions.
Okay, so I think we're doing the 10-minute quick report outs from the breakout groups. So policy, you're number one. Who can report out?
Jeff, take it away.
All right, yeah. So education outreach kind of came to the top of really kind of diverting before it's actually created. A systems approach and education of, you know, kind of getting people aware of where things are going is kind of front and center, I think. Life cycle and policymakers, you know, getting the policymakers on board. But it's, you know, consumption impact and organics prevention. So it starts with the production manufacturing, but it kind of lands directly in the hands of who's managing that waste before it gets back in the container. So the systems approach and education is the high points, I think.
And this is Ted, I was in the group as well, just wanted to add on a couple things. There was a specific suggestion that maybe the Cleantech Alliance could host a forum that could serve as sort of the locus of an ongoing kind of effort and conversation around this, as well as the suggestion that we be smart about sort of opportunities, what is politically resonant these days to sort of pursue, and plastics and climate, environmental justice and equity all made that list.
Well done. Small business.
Yeah, so we're going to have Maya do the breakout summary.
Hi, yeah, we had a small breakout room talking about the small businesses and the very small businesses, which is 5 or fewer employees, but there's apparently over 400,000 of those businesses in Washington. And so we were just talking about how it's so important to build that capacity and support them. And as they're growing, grow them green. And I always think of small business and connect it to the rural economies. And we were talking about specific examples of why those places need so certain kind of businesses would work good in those, like remakeries and repairs and things like that.
Great.
Nicely
Anything,
done.
yeah. Anything you want to add, Lisa, or anybody else? That's
Yeah,
great.
no, I just want to say that there is a revolution going on with the small businesses, and providing assistance, support, and financing for them is going to be critical as we move forward. So nice job, Maya.
Great. Okay, supply chain. I was in that one, and I was really proud. We had a real all-star team there. But I didn't get somebody assigned to do the report out because we barely had time to hear from everybody. But some key points, Rob Duff pointed out a little bit of a eyebrow raising shocker that David Alloway mentioned that Norpak is thinking of not accepting mixed paper, as they're one of the biggest markets for mixed paper in our region. So that would be very disruptive. So how do we ensure that they get a clean supply, and then the challenges of clean supply chain of material flows into reprocessing centers and production facilities. The resins that are derived from natural gas are cheap, and they work really well for producers. So why would they make the switch? How do we supply alternatives that are cheap and clean? And then Saskia provided really, she's looking at the toxic elements of the supply chain, and she provided a link, and maybe Saskia, you could include it in the chat here, but a positive list for additives, particularly for flame retardants and plasticizers, less toxic kind of alternatives to the standard feedstocks for those. So really important. Greg Hayward with Gresham, he really pointed to further advancements in refrigerants. We really need better alternatives. The transition to ones that were not destroying the ozone layer was good, but now they still have a big greenhouse gas footprint. So how do we change the alternatives and reduce leaks? And then Zaylen, small business leader, just entrepreneur, pointed out that that we may be small, but it doesn't take that much to help a small business, a startup, to double in size. And so investing in that segment of our economy can really have payoffs in rapid increase in support. So Wendy and Carol, we didn't get a chance to hear from you, but in terms of what you think the biggest levers are. So, but there's a supply chain, and then Mel, I think the Built Environment Group.
Yeah, I talked a little bit about the cluster the Cleantech Alliance is standing up, and staff will drop a link into the chat if you want to engage there. I'm wondering if Ashley or Jason maybe if you're still on, wanted to summarize the rest of our conversation. I've talked plenty today. If you want to, we'll give you a second to pop on.
This is Jason from ZillaWorks. Thanks, Mel. Yeah, we had a great discussion, and I was introduced to the biofiber gentlemen based here in Washington State that are using natural fiber materials in construction materials for the built environment. ZillaWorks also part of that equation as developing a bioepoxy resin for glues, foams, and coatings. So we talked a little bit about some of the challenges with policies, even at the municipal level, building codes of trying to get adoption for these new materials, and how we could potentially address those challenges. So,
great, thank you.
Terrific. Okay, I think now we're, and Jason, the idea of bioepoxies, we would have loved to have you in our supply chain group, because how do we detoxify the supply chain? Bioepoxies, what an intriguing product.
It's really some amazing products that we heard about in our breakout room. Yeah, and Jason will be joining Cleantech Alliance's board next year, so it'll be really easy to find him. We'll help make those connections.
Outstanding. Okay, I think we're moving into wrap up. Is that right, Mel?
I believe so.
Okay, well, I just want to say it's wonderful to have all of you here. I really appreciate everyone who's contributed and participated in this discussion series in 2021 through these 4 events. It's just incredibly exciting to be here at the launch point for an industry sector that can be as profoundly important to the global economy and to the global environment as clean materials. Clean energy, enormously important, and it's created millions of jobs on the planet, over 100,000 jobs in Oregon and Washington, and is doing it's delivering incredible benefits for the future of people. And clean materials can be at least as important economically and environmentally, and in terms of our health and our well-being, and it can bring jobs to people who need jobs in every kind of community in our region. So we identified a few ways for you to plug in here. The Cleantech Alliance, the clean materials, bringing clean materials to the business or to the building sector. The community of practice around micro enterprise and small business in the clean materials space, and then this action plan that CSI is looking to launch that will really kind of bring those elements together, focus on what are the most important actions that we can take together to hit the accelerator on this clean materials industry sector in the Pacific Northwest and become a world leader. So thank you, everyone. Mel, it's been wonderful to partner with CTA on this. Thank you for your leadership. So I'll turn it over to you to bring us home.
Great, thanks, Reese. This has been one of our bright stars in our new partnerships this year that we've engaged upon. It's been delightful working with the Center for Sustainable Infrastructure. I encourage all of you on the call to get engaged with their new project study in that 6 months. That 6-month project to create some actionable items in that report, and I'm sure we'll be collaborating to announce those report results next year and have additional clean materials programming between both of our organizations and separately. I'd encourage all of you to get engaged with our upcoming events at the Cleantech Alliance. You're welcome to join us at any of these events that we have going on. Several will have materials tie-ins highlighting, I don't believe it's on this list, but we have scheduled a meeting. Lindsay dropped information in the chat, and you can reach out to her if you're interested in joining our next brainstorming session as we're beginning to establish the scope of work our new built environment cluster will be organizing. We'd love to have any of you join us there to talk about projects and programs and work that you think the built environment cluster ought to be focusing on. And then I think that is all. Here is our closeout slide. Once again, thank you to all of our sponsors that made this event series possible. There are QR codes to scan there so you can stay engaged with each of our organizations, with CSI and with the Cleantech Alliance. And that should be a wrap. We thank you for joining us. I believe there's a survey coming in the chat where you can give us feedback about the event series and help us create even more compelling and engaging content to support all of the great work you are doing in your communities and with your organizations. Thank you for joining us, and we will see you at an upcoming event soon.